Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 689 through 691, which will cover manga chapters 752 through 754, and I guess one page from chapter 755 as well. And yeah, things are beginning to heat up as the Don Quixote family executives start to enter the fray, becoming quite the handful for everyone. And right off the bat, I'm going to apologize because my voice is a little shot. I just attended 3 Mariner games in a row over the last couple days. And I was screaming a lot to celebrate my favorite player, Ichiro, getting his number retired from the Seattle Mariners. And so, we all know there is a slight connection with Ichiro and One Piece, as Mr. 4 is, utilizes Ichiro's iconic pose, as we saw in the Arabasta arc. So, something to tie back to One Piece. But anyways, let's get back into the episodes in Dressrosa. So synopsis: with Luffy, Law, and Ushi caught in Doflamingo's trap, and the Don Quixote family executive members beginning to mobilize, it is beginning to prove very difficult to stand against them as individuals competing against one another. And it is going to take an unlikely turn of events to have all of them be able to fight back. Alright, so differences. So as with all the other Dressrosa episodes, there are quite a few handful of them. Thankfully, not quite as many as some of the last few episodes. But let's get into them. So the first one, there's an added scene in the anime of Kyros running through the city, almost getting sniped by a pirate, but then is saved by an older man, but then has to talk the older man down from capturing him because he's desperate to try and what he thinks is save everyone by handing Kyros and the other bounties over to Doflamingo, but we all know that's not going to help. Next, while the manga has a few close-up panels to remind us that Sabo and Fujitora are still fighting, the anime takes it a step further and actually shows us more of this fight, which I'm not opposed to, actually, because obviously this is a crazy matchup between Sabo and Fujitora, and it'd be cool to see more of it, so I'm glad that we do get a little bit more in the anime. Next, the anime adds another scene of Robin, Rebecca, and Bartolomeo getting shot at in the sky, and Bartolomeo planning to piss on them to get them to stop, kind of referencing him pissing in the ring earlier. Now, this scene is completely added for the anime. It does not occur in the manga. The anime also adds a scene of Bellamy walking through the sunflower garden on his way to see Doflamingo, and this is an added scene in the anime, as we don't see Bellamy again in the manga till after he's already reached his destination to see Doflamingo. During the scene where the random citizen was aiming at his wife and child due to Doflamingo's parasite ability, the anime shows us what this man was actually aiming at. We do see his wife and child in the anime, but in the manga, it cuts to right when the other guy jumps on top of him to stop him from shooting, but it never shows the wife and kid in the manga. And in that, it doesn't really even indicate that it was a wife and kids. They only make a mention of the fact that he says thanks for making it so that I didn't hurt my family. And I think this was a good addition, as it adds more weight and gives more context to this scene. Like you see the struggle this guy is going through, like the desperation that he does not want to shoot his family, but Doflamingo is making him. And this scene is much more powerful when you do see what the actual context of that situation is and the weight of it all. Next, this scene is also kind of extended a bit, that it shows Riku and Usopp talking on top of the plateau, and this serves as the moment where the 2 scouts figure out where Riku and Usopp are. In the manga, we don't actually see this, and instead, the 2 scouts kind of show up during the earlier scene that I just talked about with the family and the guy, that they have discovered where Riku and Usopp are. And so it kind of all flows together, whereas in the anime, they interrupt it by having the scouts actually find Usopp and Riku. Another scene that's wholly added is Kinemon is kind of listening and searching for Kanjuro in the pit. This is not in the manga at all. The beginning of episode 691 adds a bunch of filler fighting with the gladiators taking out a few more grunts, and the executives are also kind of getting more involved, and it retreads some of the same ground that it's already covered at the end of episode 690. So this is literally just redundant to sort of draw out more time. And lastly, This specifically adds Sai and Ideo taking on Lao Ji and Gladius, Chinjao taking on Baby 5, and King Elizabello taking a kick from Dellinger. And there's a moment where Hyruden takes a shot in the back from Mach Weiss, and this is all added. It doesn't actually return to the canon manga material till Dellinger attacks Dagama, trying to take him out as he's figured out that he's their strategist, kind of pulling them all together, making them fight as one. So that's it for all the differences, or at least the major ones that I could find. Of course, there are a lot of smaller ones too, but I don't really want to go into those. But let's get into the episode. So we begin with Luffy, Law, and Ushi caught in Doflamingo's trap, and cruelly, Doflamingo incapacitates them by shooting poor Ushi several times with string bullets, dropping them into the water. And Law, the ever pragmatic but cold person he is, tells Luffy to abandon Ushi and save himself, but Luffy can't let that happen and he falls into the water. Of course, we all love Luffy for showing concern for Ushi despite putting himself at risk. And, Luffy always treats his animal buddies the best, and so, yeah, we know he's not going to abandon them. This scene is really interesting that I had never thought of until this rewatch, because if you listen to the dialogue, it kind of hints at and represents Law's two possible futures. Doflamingo criticizes Law for his decision to ally with Luffy of all people. Doflamingo believes that despite Luffy's insane ability to draw people to his cause, he sees Luffy as an idiot who cares way too much. Doflamingo then mentions that Law is more cold and cunning, and as a kid he was even more so, but Law cuts him off and shouts that he was saved by someone, that he's not going to become like Doflamingo. And what makes this scene so interesting is that line from that Oda drops, or that Oda has Law drop about Ushi to abandon him once he was shot. Like, Oda threw that line in there to show that Law still has some of that cold and calculating trait in him. But when Doflamingo points out that he used to be even more cold, Law rejects this, saying he was saved by a man named Corazon. And deep down, despite Law growing up this cold and cunning kid, and someone specifically, this Corazon, saved him and put him back down the right path. And despite Law still being somewhat cold and cunning, you can tell deep down he is a kind and caring person and wants to be that warm person, but still struggling with fighting sort of his colder instincts that he grew up with. We've seen examples of Law struggling with this, especially in Punk Hazard, as at first he thinks that saving the kids was going to be a burden and weigh them down, and suggests to leave them. But later on, he relents and helps, and not only helps rescue them, but then takes the time and care to treat them of their poisoning. And Law is constantly kind of fighting his baser, colder instincts to survive, and his heart of hearts, he wants to be a warm person. Along with another big reason that's yet to be revealed, I think this is why Law chose Luffy. Specifically the warmth and care that Luffy shows for everyone is something I think deep down Law wants as well. And Oda and Toei in this scene even have Law placed between Doflamingo and Luffy, with Law being more on Luffy's side. Visually, he's closer to him to kind of show this conflict. And this scene is a lot more interesting than I first gave it credit for, because I never made this connection when I originally read it, or even on subsequent rewatches. I just didn't pay attention to it really. But yeah, you can really see this is kind of like that moment where it's like Law could have become Doflamingo had he kept on his path, and if this Corazon never intervened, he might not be in the position he is. But now that with Corazon's help, he is now more closely aligned with Luffy, and the more time he spends with Luffy, you can tell that he's definitely starting to warm up even more so. But just when you think they're in some real trouble, guess what comes to save them by seemingly sheer coincidence or luck? Abdullah and Jet come back to save them, as it turns out it was a string clone, proving that once again, while it seems like luck or coincidence, it's born out of Luffy's sort of warmth and willingness to help others that yet again moves other people to act in turn to help him. Now that they've kind of escaped sort of the immediate trouble of potentially fighting Doflamingo's string clone, Luffy, not wanting to fall behind, of course thinks of the most ridiculous way to catch up to everybody by creating his own shortcut, blasting his way up to the second level with a massive elephant gun, leaving Ushi to be cared for by Abdullah and Jet. And I like that. Like, I like that Luffy has them stay behind to care for him. But I was suspicious of them at first, but these guys turned out to be really stand-up guys. Like I'm slowly beginning to really like a lot about both of these guys. Like, I don't know. All the gladiators are really starting to grow on me by this point. And I remember even the first time just reading through this and just really getting attached to a lot of these characters. Then we get a tease into Law's childhood and backstory, which is incredibly ominous and curious. Unfortunately, we don't get to see this for quite a while longer, but even just the short sort of image of Kid Law with like a bandolier of like grenades across his chest is incredible. And from one troubled guy to another, the next episode begins with Bellamy finally reaching Doflamingo and confronting him after having found out that Dellinger and Diamante had mentioned that Doflamingo wanted him killed. And Doflamingo is an absolute D-bag, as the first thing he asks Bellamy is, was he able to take down Straw Hat? Which is incredibly condescending considering he knows that Luffy is still alive and well. And it just shows how he loves to, more than anything, psychologically torture and attack people. And despite all this, Bellamy still wants a chance to follow Doflamingo. And this is where Doflamingo shows us a little bit more about what drives and motivates him, as he responds to Bellamy that they ultimately want different things. Bellamy wants to be a pirate and follow who he thinks is the greatest pirate in Doflamingo, but Doflamingo himself tells Bellamy and us, the audience, that his real goal isn't to be a pirate. In fact, it never even mattered what he chose to call himself. His ultimate goal was to destroy the world. And after hearing that, it's very interesting that Oda decided to name his underworld name Joker, because it really does sound like the Joker from Batman, and specifically Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight Joker. Like, he describes himself as an agent of chaos, and as Alfred puts it, some men just want to see the world burn. And when you look at that, like, the parallels are very apparent now. Like, whether, that was intentional or not, and I'm not saying that Oda based Doflamingo off of the Joker from Batman, but at least in terms of, like, philosophy, they are very similar. Additionally, there's another aspect of Doflamingo that has yet to be revealed that is also very Joker-esque as well. But in the One Piece Green companion book, Oda does reveal potentially why he had the Joker moniker attached to Doflamingo, and it had nothing to do with Batman. But I can't really talk about that without going into spoilers, so I'll discuss this more in the spoiler section. Now, this revelation, of course, shakes Bellamy to the core, as it upends his entire life's goal and meaning. He was following someone whose values and goals were nothing but a sham, apparently. Bellamy is a really tragic character when you really look at his arc up till now. This dude left with dreams of becoming a pirate, not unlike Luffy, but somewhere along the way he became disillusioned and cynical, and his dreams basically fell off, and instead he started following a pirate like Doflamingo, who displayed the qualities of strength and intimidation and power. But then comes Luffy, someone with the exact opposite of those qualities, who proves to him that dreams are still possible by having his ass handed to him by a literal dreamer. And we saw what effect that had on him and Jaya. And after this experience, he decides to find out if Luffy was right. And he realizes that dreams are possible, as he finds Skypiea as well. But because he admires Doflamingo so much, he can't let it go. And ultimately being betrayed by the person he admired most and told that his entire life was a worthless endeavor and based on a lie. Bellamy reminds me a lot of Ging, like two flawed but potentially decent people if they had met better mentors or role models earlier in their lives. Instead, they both decided to attach and commit themselves to a fault, to two incredibly rotten people in Doflamingo and Don Krieg, respectively. Yeah, it kind of highlights just how important having that one person who is a good person that believes in you at an early age. Like, this theme is a bit more subtle right now, but Bellamy's journey here is setting up an even bigger example of this with Law. We've already gotten hints that Law was originally set to basically be groomed to be Doflamingo's successor, but this Corazon intervened and saved Law's life somehow. Now, Bellamy is potentially what could have happened to Law had Corazon not intervened, and this theme is actually everywhere in One Piece. You can say that about almost all the Straw Hats except for maybe Brook. Someone in their lives that set them on their right path and risked their lives to protect and guide them. And in turn, you can see that many of the Straw Hat members are paying it forward now and saving and mentoring and protecting younger people, both directly and indirectly, with people like Kobe, Vivi, Isa, and all the children on Fishman Island, as well as indirectly like what we saw in One Piece fan letter, although I know that isn't officially canon, but like I like to think that the events of that are. Like, it just fits so well, it doesn't contradict anything, and I like that the Straw Hats have also had an effect on just random people, fans of those who don't directly interact with the Straw Hats but are still just as inspired by them. Now, moving on, now that the gladiators have reached the second plateau, they are now beginning to run into the Don Quixote executives, showing the difference in the level of strength, as Dellinger right away takes out Slayman, pretty gruesomely I might add, by impaling him with his horns right to the gut a la Frieza in his second form against Krillin back in the Namek Saga, spoiler if you haven't seen Dragon Ball Z. The rest of them begin to quickly turn the tides on the gladiators, with Gladius, Mach Vice, Laoji, and Baby 5 showing their strength by defeating them fairly easily, at least the weaker ones. The stronger ones at this point were, of course, the two standout Bartolomeo and Cavendish, as well as potentially Sai and Hyruden as well. And Qingzhou is, I do consider, probably one of the stronger ones, but he was also seen being knocked down by Gladius's punk mines. But now, faced with these incredibly formidable enemies, it's here they begin to realize that there is no time to be competing amongst themselves anymore, and they need to begin to work together. And it's really fun seeing them finally begin to work together to support one another. Like, I live for these moments in One Piece, when unlikely pairings of people begin to coalesce into a unit, and that shot of them near the end of the episode, all standing shoulder to shoulder, holding their ground and making a path for Luffy, is so damn awesome. Like, even Cavendish shows up to help Luffy get to the top faster and gives him Law and even Kuros, who hopped on a ride begrudgingly, and they all go together. And I also love that little side thought that Law has where he mentions how there was a lot more space on the boat, that he felt more comfortable on Ushi than Farrell. And there's a moment in this conversation with Kuros and Luffy that I really like that shows that Luffy isn't just this carefree idiot not paying attention to a lot of things. He picks up on Kuros' desperation to get to the top and face Diamante, but for a moment, Luffy fears that he's going to face him just to die for blind revenge or to sacrifice himself for Rebecca. And Luffy even lowers his tone of voice in the anime, and in the manga you can see his face get really serious when he questions Kuros about this. But when Kuros determinedly declares that now that he's in his human body, he isn't going to lose. And after hearing that, Luffy goes right back to his normal cheerful self and says, okay. And as we know, Luffy hates self-sacrifice. We saw this really early on as the Orange Town arc in the Mayor Boodle. He was willing to go in guns blazing against Buggy when it was all but certain that he was going to get killed by Buggy. As well as in the Baratier arc when he yells at Sanji that giving up his life isn't a form of gratitude. And this is doubly true after what happened with Ace at Marineford. If Luffy thought that Kuros was in fact going to go up there to die, he almost certainly would have done the exact same thing he did to Mayor Boodle and knock him out before he could do anything stupid. There are a lot of other examples like this too, like how he stops Vivi from shouldering everything before the climactic battle in Arabasta and yells at her to risk their lives as well, instead of just her own. He even says as much during his third clash with Crocodile under the city when when Crocodile asks Luffy why he fights so hard for some kingdom he has no attachment to which one of my favorite moments, where Luffy vehemently yells back, he doesn't want to see Vivi die, implying that if left on her own, she would most certainly push herself to the point where she would sacrifice herself trying to save her people. I think also additionally he made a promise to Rebecca that he'd make sure nothing happened to Kuros and that they'd be reunited. And yeah, I think just based on that, he wanted to make sure that Kuros is okay. And yeah, it's such a small and great moment that carries so much weight in history in terms of the character for Luffy as well as Kuros. With all of them working together somewhat, Dellinger realizes that the issue seems to be that Dagama is strategizing and bringing them to all together, and it takes him out by stabbing him in the gut too, like he did with Slayman. But thanks to Dagama's fat body, it seems he's less hurt by this, and in turn grabs onto Dellinger to stop him from going after Luffy any further. And something about this scene is that when Dagama gets stabbed, Luffy calls out and calls him Daruma in his usual sort of missaid or associative nickname. And in this case, it's actually both. So obviously Daruma sounds a lot like Dagama, but also Daruma is a reference to the way Dagama actually looks, and in particularly how his body is shaped. And I know I explained this in Fishman Island for, when one of Hodi's sort of officers is also named Daruma, the one that, chomps down on everything. But just in case, I'll explain it again here as well. So in Japanese culture, there's a thing called a Daruma doll, and they're usually these round egg-shaped red dolls that are sort of a symbol or a talisman said to symbolize perseverance and good luck for your goals. Usually you buy these at Buddhist temples, and the eyes are left as empty white spots. And when you first get one, you set a goal and you paint the left eye black. And when you've accomplished said goal, you then will fill in the right eye with the black eye. But if you look at like a Daruma doll, it's shaped very similar to Dagama's body, which is where I think Luffy got his sort of association, and also where I think Oda came up with his name as well. I also know a lot of the community, like the One Piece fan community, thinks that Dagama looks a lot like Dr. Robotnik or Eggman from the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, and they're not wrong. He looks exactly like him, and it's pretty funny too. One other thing that I kind of wanted to take note of in this scene is that in the manga, after Luffy yells, Daruma, after, Dagama was stabbed by Dellinger, there's another speech bubble yelling, Dagama, but it's not entirely clear who's saying this, and the only people in that panel are Dagama on the ground holding onto Dellinger, and then Luffy and Kuros on the back of Farrell looking back at them. The anime doesn't answer this question either, as they opt to completely omit this line, and I often wonder if this is Luffy correcting himself, which sounds kind of unlikely for Luffy, or this was Dagama hilariously correcting Luffy as he was being impaled. And in my own headcanon, I choose to believe it's the latter, that he is so offended that Luffy mispronounces his name that even while he's being stabbed and like desperately clinging on to Dellinger, that he still finds time to like correct Luffy. That's my headcanon because it's so much funnier if it's that. Now, later on, after two brief scenes with the citizens of Dressrosa helping one another, but also kind of planning to capture Riku and Usopp, hoping that by capturing them, this would end this madness, as well as Kinemon searching for Kanjuro, we get to the Smile Factory where Inhel puts his plan into action to get inside the plant as he ingeniously has the Pink Bee Squad skywrite a message to the Tontara inside, knowing that they are far more stronger than the jailers there, as well as they outnumber them. And they are both strong enough and in great enough numbers to fight back if they're allowed to. And this moment is awesome, seeing them fight back, even if they don't understand the whole truth. One thing they know to always be true, though, is that their Nakama don't lie. And boy, is that never truer than ever with the Tontara tribe, because they take everything so literally that they're almost incapable of lying. And seeing them finally rise up, beating down these guys who've mercilessly tortured them is so satisfying. And I didn't think it would be as satisfying, but like when they first like fight back, it's a really cool moment. Now, when we get to the canon moment back in the pit, we get the long-awaited reveal of Kanjuro as Kinemon finally finds him hidden away in the pit, munching on a really weird-looking piece of cabbage or lettuce. And it turns out he drew that with his devil fruit ability, the Fude Fude no Mi, or the brush fruit. Now, Fude means brush in Japanese, and we actually don't learn the official name of this fruit until the Bibliocard data book entry comes out for Kanjuro. And At the time, we wouldn't learn it for over a year from then. So I'm just going to tell you here that it is called the Fude fruit or the Fude no Mi. And this fruit is pretty incredible. It allows him to make whatever he draws come to life. Now, the unfortunate thing is that because Kanjuro sucks at drawing, the things that come to life are incredibly feeble looking, and he can't even draw straight lines to make stable ladders, which is so sad. And of course, Oda makes a character that has an incredible power, but adds a comedic twist to it by attaching it to someone who can't draw. Like, what? What's crazy is that he can create food with this power, and it seems like he can actually survive off of this. Although, based on Kinemon kind of disgustedly rejecting the offer, it probably tastes like crap, or more likely, it may taste like ink. And so, yeah, it may like at least fill your stomach, probably taste like ass. Kanjuro himself sports a very unique character design, as unlike Momo and Kinemon, he doesn't quite look like a traditional samurai or like a feudal Japanese person. Instead, his design is based on that of a traditional Japanese kabuki theater actor. Now, kabuki theater is a classic Japanese form of theater performance that is a kind of a mix of like dramatic and traditional dance performances with really highly stylized performances and very decorative costumes and sets. The actors all mostly wear what's called a kumadori makeup, which is the white makeup that you see Kanjuro wearing with the colorful flourishes and everything. The kanji for kabuki individually, if you separate them out, is sing, dance, and skill. So in essence, kabuki could also be called the art and singing, or the art of singing and dancing. And kabuki theater can be traced back all the way to the 1600s in Japanese history, when it started out as a troupe of female dancers performing, and they played both male and female parts. But as it gained popularity and it also became attached to, let's say, less than savory acts behind the scenes, with the men beginning to fight for the services of the women off stage, they made it a rule to make the kabuki performers all male only. And to this day, that rule still stands, which is really too bad. And I explain all this because it's somewhat relevant to Kanjuro's characterization as the series goes on. Now, also, when it comes to the folks from Wano, there are a lot of subtle clues in this scene that tell us a lot more about who they are, but I really don't want to say much more than that, since even to me, when I first read through this part of One Piece, some of it I had started to suspect some things, but then there were a lot of other things that I was genuinely shocked and surprised by. So I won't say much more than that to preserve as much of it for you as possible, but definitely pay attention and scrutinize every detail if you're interested in picking up some of these finer details, because they're there, and it is interesting if you pay attention to all the characters that are from Wano. However, one thing I do want to talk about is there was always something that stood out to me in this scene, even when I first read it, and that is, if Kanjuro had the ability to escape that easily, why did he just stay there captured? Like, you could argue, I suppose, that even if he did get out, where would he go? He had no idea where Kinemon and Momo went, and leaving the island to search for them would make it almost impossible, probably, to find them. And it would just be better to just sit tight and hope that Momo and Kinemon come back to find him. But that always did stand out to me. Like, he could have maybe escaped at least the prison and laid low, in a more comfortable environment. But instead, he just chose to stay in there, which is, I don't know, really weird to me. That always just kind of was just strange to me. Like, why? Of course, we'll find out more about this as the series goes on, and as we learn about, Kanjuro and Kinemon and Momo. Now, the episode ends with a pretty rousing monologue from Cavendish about what is currently at stake with this fight. It's become very clear that Doflamingo has no intention of actually seeing this game through fairly, and has noticed how despite all this, it seems he's even enjoying this. But Cavendish, being kind of the main character of his own story, has committed to defeating Doflamingo, which instantly sparks another competition among the four guys on the horse. And that bit where they start comparing their claim to Doflamingo's head based on the duration of their grudges, It's pretty funny. Kuro's saying he's waited 10 years for his revenge, with Law one-upping him, saying he's waited 13 years. And then Luffy just randomly making up a number, saying that he's been waiting for 30 years when he's only 19. And Cavendish yelling back, "There's no way in hell you're older than me." Stuff like that is just really funny. And one thing I love about this moment and these characters that Oda has created is that they all have their own sort of main character energy, and they're all interesting enough that you could actually construct a story around each of them as main characters, and it would be stories you'd actually be interested in. At least I would be. Like, if there was a story based just solely around Law's journey, I would love that. Cavendish would be really interesting too. Like, even Kuros, I think, would be really interesting to follow. In fact, we kind of basically got all of Kuros' story already, and it was very interesting. The episode ends as they make it to the third level, but they're confronted by a squad of creepy-looking giant nutcracker soldiers, which are kind of worrisome, but you never feel any doubt that these four couldn't take these guys out. But the scarier part is that this implies that Sugar has regained her consciousness and is ready to fight again. So that could potentially prove a terrible challenge for them to try and face Sugar. But yeah, we'll have to wait till the next set of episodes to find out what she is up to. But yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. If you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast for updates when I post new episodes, as well as see pictures of my manga collection and card collection. And as always, just listening to the podcast is enough support for me. But if you feel like extra supporting me, check out my Buy Me a Coffee profile. And I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Spoiler section for this one, because there are quite a few things I wanted to talk about. But if you're not interested in those, stay safe out there. And I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. Okay, so spoiler section. As always, this is more just unscripted ramblings. But yeah, there's a lot of things that this set of episodes really either kind of foreshadow or start sort of the genesis of. Like, for example, this is probably where we start to see the birth of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. Like, when they all start working together, like, this is where you see them kind of forming the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, essentially, and you see the potential of how strong these guys could be as allies to the Straw Hat crew. And it's really awesome to see in retrospect, or in hindsight, seeing them kind of come together like this for the first time. As we know, later on, they all form the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, and it's really awesome. Obviously, Leo is missing here, but yeah, I think that was really cool to see that they how well they work together. And yeah, and like I was mentioning with sort of the main character energy for a lot of these guys, and it's like, yeah, like Oda really took the time to build all of them up and give potential more depth to them because of the fact that they are going to be here for a little bit longer. Maybe not as like main characters in our story, but yeah, it's really fun to see. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about was Doflamingo and Joker. So, yeah, Doflamingo was called Joker because originally, according to the One Piece Green companion book, he was going to be a more closer ally or even a direct subordinate of Kaido. And as we know, Kaido, like Doflamingo, Doflamingo uses playing cards for his crew's naming scheme, but instead of, reverse of that, Kaido uses playing cards for his crew's naming scheme, while Doflamingo uses the suits. And so, like, for example, Kaido uses King, Queen, Jack, as well as, he uses the numbers for his sort of this mutant giant army. And then the Tobiroppo members aren't cards themselves, but they're names of various card games from around the world. Now, I'll get into more details about that. But yeah, and then Doflamingo, on the other hand, uses, suits like heart, diamond, clubs, and spades to sort of reference his executive members. And so yeah, that's where at least that's what Oda mentions is the sort of the origination of the nickname Joker. It has nothing to do with Batman, but it's so crazy how many parallels there are between Doflamingo and the Joker from Batman, because not only are the things that I mentioned in the non-spoiler section true, there's another added thing that makes him much more closer to Joker, which is the smile fruits. So later on, obviously, we learn in Wano that the smile fruits poison the people who eat the sort of the incomplete versions or the failed versions of the fruit, which is about 90% of the time, and it basically forces them into always perpetually be smiling and laughing, whether they're happy or sad or not. And it's a truly horrifying revelation. I'll obviously get into this more when we get to Wano, but I just remember getting chills when Hiyori tells Zoro about the truth behind the smile fruits, and it's like really disturbing and chilling when you realize what that is. And yeah, and it's very similar to how when in a lot of different stories, whether it's the movies, whether it's the animated series, whether it's the comics, Joker uses a form of poison gas that often leaves people with these like really horrific smiles perpetually plastered on their face, or they just can't stop laughing. And he has that poison laughing gas. And so yeah, it's incredible how similar Doflamingo is to the Batman's Joker without even really being actually inspired by him. Like, I don't know. Oda doesn't ever really make that direct connection, but somehow I feel like maybe he is kind of drawing from Batman's Joker. But yeah, it is pretty incredible how many parallels there are between Doflamingo and Joker. The next thing I wanted to talk about is obviously Kanjuro. So obviously if you've seen Wano, we know Kanjuro is the traitor, and it's interesting all the different things that are laid, like the grounds are laid here. Like you can, if you're really paying attention and you're like a really smart person, like you can figure this out. Of course, I'm not saying I was one of those people because I was completely caught off guard by a lot of it. Like for example, like when Kanjuro first sort of reunites with Kinemon, he asks about Momonosuke. And the way he talks about him is not like you're talking about someone else's son. He definitely talks as if he really like has Momonosuke on this sort of higher sort of regard. And it's your first like kind of clue that Momonosuke is not who he says he is, and that he's probably some sort of a royal, at least has some royal lineage, because of the way that Kanjuro refers to, and it shows more concern for Momonosuke than he does for Kinemon, which is interesting. And obviously, the fact that his design is of a kabuki actor, hinting at the fact that, yeah, he is a performer, and that he is performing the hell out of his role. And yeah, that he could be lying. And it's also interesting that, like, if you really wanted to sort of figure out, and a lot of people picked up on this and I didn't, but his bad drawing, and you can tell immediately that something is off because he's introduced eating the lettuce with his right hand. So it's like he's right-handed, but then inexplicably is shown drawing with his left hand, cluing us in on the fact that he might be intentionally drawing bad with his offhand for some reason. And we obviously learn later on the reason is because he wants to hide the fact that he can use his ability competently and threateningly. And so, yeah, when you pick up on that, you really get a sense of like, maybe something's not right with Kanjuro. And when the whole concept of the traitor comes into play, when we get to Wano, that there is somebody among them that could potentially be a traitor, I think a lot of people did pick up on the fact that Kanjuro could be the one. It was either Kanjuro, I think a lot of people, if my memory serves me, like a lot of people thought that Kanjuro or maybe I think with Oda, he specifically kind of made it seem like Ashura is the guy that was the traitor, because he was always so grumpy and everything. And And then there are some people that thought maybe Kiku was the traitor as well for some reason. I don't know why, but I don't really know what the rationale behind that one was. But yeah, I think a lot of people's minds went to Kanjuro because of just a lot of these smaller clues. And I remember after the reveal, or no, not after the reveal. I remember finding this Reddit post that during the Oden flashback, before the things, like people actually like figured it out like long before. There was like a Reddit post that was put up that called back to somebody like figuring out that Kanjuro was a traitor like a year prior, which I thought was insane. And I thought maybe that was a good theory, and it's like, that is really good. And I didn't pay much attention to it, but then when we got to that point in the story, I was like, oh my god, he was right. And I wish I could find that Reddit post because it was so well made. Like, the guy points out all these little clues throughout the entire story from when Kanjuro was introduced all the way up to like a certain point. I can't remember where, but yeah, I remember reading this Reddit post and thinking, wow, this guy is really onto something. And sure enough, he was dead on, like incredibly dead on, like with all these like small little details. But yeah, it was really cool living through this. And but for me, with Kanjuro, I was completely shocked. I'll be honest, I had not even suspected him at all. So when he was revealed as the traitor, and in that scene where he takes Momonosuke, when they're all waiting at the dock. Yeah, I was like, what? So yeah, I was completely shocked by this. So I don't want to ruin that for anybody else. Because it is, if you're not paying attention, or you really don't really care to know, it is quite the twist. I will say, like, Oda, like, this is one of those twists that is done perfectly well because it makes sense. It doesn't come out of nowhere. Like, if you go back and read all these, everything from Dressrosa, Zoe, and the earlier events of Wano, like, all the clues are there. Like, you look at it and you're just like, yeah, how did I not pick up on this? And so yeah, that's what makes a good twist. It's not a twist that just comes out of nowhere. It's like a twist that's like hidden in there. And once you know the twist and you go back and see all the clues that were there, that was just in plain sight, but you just forgot or just didn't notice, it's pretty amazing. So yeah, this is definitely one of my favorite Oda twists. But anyways, this episode's getting a little long, so we'll cut it there. But yeah, hope you enjoyed, and thanks for listening. I'll see you on the next episode. See ya.